It's 2023. It's time to take a look at the road ahead for Xbox. Ooh, it's an interesting time because 2022, which is roughly hard to say, is now behind us, and 2023 is, well, now here, which means it's time to look ahead for what's on the road for Xbox. And it's going to be an interesting time because 2022 was a little bit of an interesting year. Yeah, they dropped some hardware like the Elite Series 2 controller Core Edition, but they also didn't ship games like they were expecting to. And so Microsoft is, lined up itself for 2023 to be an interesting year, and one that I think is actually going to be pretty big for the company considering what got punted from 2022, and that assumes that nothing in 2023 gets punted until 2024. But of course, we couldn't kick off a look ahead about what's coming for Xbox without talking about the massive acquisition that Microsoft announced roughly a year ago. It was in January of last year that they said, hey, we're going to spend about $69 billion to buy Activision. And so we all know the story, or most of the story up until now. Microsoft is battling through the courts. I still believe that Microsoft will be able to close this acquisition. They're going to go to court here in the near future, and keep in mind it's administrative court, not the federal court, and so they're going to plead their case in front of the judge. I believe it's just a judge, and really open up about what is going on here. And we should get some more fun information like we have out of other regulatory body filings and everything else. So that is obviously happening. Now, assuming that does close, I don't think Microsoft is going to be buying any other gaming companies for a little bit, at least not actual content games. Maybe if there's some technology platform or something along that line. But if you look at how much money Microsoft has spent, they're closing in on roughly $100 billion spent, right? They've got $69 billion for ABK. They spent $7 billion on ZeniMax. They've spent $2.5 billion on Mojang, and that doesn't even account things like 343, Coalition, Ninja Theory, and a whole bunch of others that Microsoft has bought. Well, I don't think they were in the tens of billions by any stretch of the imagination. Microsoft obviously spent some money, and they're closing in on $100 billion worth of acquisitions for Xbox. And at that point, I think Microsoft has to be content with its content catalog. Otherwise, something in their strategy just really isn't making sense. So once that does close, I do think that will be the end of Microsoft's acquisitions, at least on the grand scale, for some time, while they try to bring all that stuff together and get into a content generation machine that is really firing on all cylinders. So be on the lookout for that. Now, speaking of the game, about a year ago, Microsoft put out this blog post, and let's just say it didn't age all that well. And we all know what's really happened. Starfield and Redfall got pushed into the next year. And so Microsoft is, I believe, going to be taking a more cautious approach about announcing availability dates, because that was candidly a black eye. Because, hey, these are massive titles. Microsoft spent a lot of money to bring these studios in-house. And it's like, where are the games that Microsoft has been promising from these studios? And when obviously they get punted, it's a little bit challenging. But that should mean that this year, and I do expect both Redfall and Starfield to ship this year, I'm still expecting that, means it should be lined up for a pretty good content season, or a year, I should say, for Microsoft. When you toss in Forza and a couple other titles that should be arriving, they should have plenty to lure people into Game Pass. But obviously, this blog post did not age all that well, which means Microsoft is, I think, going to be much more cautious about announcing a definitive release dates as they go forward, which brings up the next question of, what is Microsoft going to be doing with game showcases this year, right? They've got a lot of content coming, at least on paper. They should be having events lined up where they showcase the games, and I do expect that Microsoft will continue that tradition, obviously, in 2023 with many of their big name titles. But without a doubt, a lot of the messaging is going to be tied around Xbox Game Pass, the day one arrivals, and getting all of this content in that subscription, because it's such a big deal for Microsoft's long-tailed gaming strategy. Now, the other interesting one to watch is going to be Halo Infinite. Obviously, we all know what's going on there. There's been a lot of leadership changes. They finally shipped Forge, and they're finally maybe starting to get a little bit of momentum, maybe just a smidgen. At least they're heading into 2023 with at least the creator aspect online in some capacity. And so 2023 will be interesting because there's new leadership involved. It'll be curious to see what Microsoft can get out the door and how they're going to pivot to maintain a long-tailed strategy for what is going on with that brand. I mean, Halo Infinite is a huge title, and Battle Royale keeps being whispered, and so the question becomes is, what is Microsoft's strategy here to keep the games and Halo Infinite and everything else front and foremost among everyone who likes to play the games? Now, on the hardware side, the interesting thing about the hardware side is it appears that Microsoft is putting a lot of their marketing efforts around the Xbox Series S. No surprise there. Look what they did over the holiday shopping season. They were slashing prices on the Series S. The Series X remained at its same MSRP as its launch date, or when it came to market. And so the Series S got a lot of attention, really trying to get that price as low as possible. At $199 was the lowest I think I saw that you could buy it officially from Microsoft. And so I think we're going to see an aggressive price cutting on the Series S become permanent. At least that $249 looks like that might be coming back and be Microsoft's new MSRP with a potential discount to like Costco and other places along those lines. Now, what about an Elite Series 3 controller? I'm not convinced that that's actually going to launch this year. The reason being is Microsoft just got their Elite Series controller into the design lab. And if they're going to come out with a new Series 3 controller, that means they would need to update the design lab. And it took them a long time to get that product in there. And I don't suspect that they're ready to just refresh it and move it on out, which means I don't think we will see a new Elite Series controller coming out, considering also that the Core just came around too. The only thing really missing, in my opinion, at least from what I know right now, is that it's missing the share button, right? That's the one primary difference between the controllers out of the box and things that, but the differences between the Elite Series controller. So the other thing too, I think we will start to see more themed, or at least we'll see a couple themed Xbox Series X consoles come to market, right? Microsoft loves to do these brand sort of deals where they're limited edition consoles. The one thing I would be interested to see is, are we going to get an Xbox Series X without a disk drive? Would Microsoft be willing to cut the price that way with the console? Now, granted, having 3 different consoles in market is a little interesting because, right, you've got a lot of different marketing mechanisms going on there. So that's the one thing that kind of makes me think, no, they're not going to do it, just because, hey, they've got 3 SKUs. Now, Sony is believed to be taking an interesting approach where they're only going to be selling the diskless version with a USB peripheral, and that would be an interesting strategy for Microsoft to go down. I mean, there's the whole HD DVD drive thing from many years ago, but that would be an interesting way for Microsoft to approach this SKU problem, if you will, and potentially lower the price, or at least give more options out there. I'd be curious to also, as well, if they did come up with that like USB drive, could you do it on the Series S? Not sure that you would be able to, but here we are talking about it. And I think what Microsoft will be looking at is actually how price sensitive do they think the consumer is. Think of it this way. Microsoft already has a price advantage in many markets with the Series X over the PlayStation 5 because Sony had to raise PlayStation pricing because of various currency fluctuations. But in the US, it's remained relatively stable. If Microsoft believes that by, hey, dropping the Series X by $50, if they can do that by adding in an external drive or just shipping a SKU without it, that would give them a pretty competitive advantage over a PlayStation, assuming that they don't adjust their pricing as well here in the States. So it'll be interesting to see if Microsoft does take that approach. It really is going to come down to, they likely have economics people on this trying to determine what sort of unit sales they would see by dropping the Series X and going head to head with PlayStation at a price differentiation. So that will be interesting to see. The other big thing that is on the agenda for Microsoft, I think this might be the year that we see some shuffling around in their many different live Game Pass SKU services. It is muddy and it is convoluted, and it's tricky and it's unbalanced. So here's what I think is going to happen. Microsoft is obviously trying to buy ABK. When they do that, they're going to have to justify it. And I think that's when Microsoft is going to take a look at all these SKUs, and they may already have these plans in place, and then reconfigure them, because Xbox Live Gold doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore. It just sits out there on its own. And then you also have this Game Pass, and you have Ultimate, and it's like you get into this weird world of like, what is your marketing message to the consumer at the end of the day with something like this? So I think Microsoft, once they close the ABK deal, they will raise the pricing of Xbox Game Pass, and that will be the only option. So Game Pass Basic, or whatever console you want to call it, would jump by $5 to $14.99, and the Ultimate would go to $19.99, and then Xbox Live Gold would probably go away of the dodo in some capacity. The real big challenge here is that Microsoft has a lot of people paying for Xbox Live Gold, and they don't want to give up that revenue. And so more than likely they may, I don't know if they'd roll them into this plan or what they would do, would prorate their Game Pass sort of thing, which Microsoft has done in the past, where you could roll things over and get a proration and sometimes even benefits while doing that. So I think once ABK closes, that is when Microsoft will do this. Hopefully games with gold will probably finally be sent out to pasture as well. Like January's titles were somewhat of a joke. And so my expectation is that's going to happen. And there's some justification here. Microsoft has already said, I mean, Phil Phil Spencer specifically came out and said, look, games are going to be $70. That's the way the cookies crumbling right now. And so, yeah, Microsoft isn't afraid to toy with pricing. I think that is when we finally see that whole rat's nest of stuff. So, recapping here, we've got hardware, we've got potentially a Series X stuff going on. Either themed Xbox is almost positive is going to happen. We'll see if they do a discless version to really try to lower that price. They haven't touched it yet. We've got game showcases, but they're going to be much more tailored to the games they're launching in the immediate timeline. We're not going to see an Elite and some other stuff, and so yeah, Activision is the big one on the agenda for right around the corner. So these are the things that I'm watching for in 2023 out of Xbox, strategies that I think make sense that Microsoft is very clearly mulling over. And I'd love to know what you guys think. Is there anything that I missed that Microsoft should be looking at, should be thinking about doing? Obviously, there's a lot of games that are coming out that I glossed over, because if you want games, go look at like Dealer, Cult, Lord, those podcasts. Those guys do it much better than I do. I really like the business side of things, and so that is where we are at. And yeah, so that's Xbox in 2023. Make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.